and then you've continued to write. So you have another book, which is a letter to liberals, censorship and COVID, an attack on science and American ideals. And you know, there's a lot to talk about here, including you going, I think, deep on a lot of questions about what was effective. You know, did the vaccines save millions and end the pandemic, or did they not? You talk about distancing, keeping kids out of school, masks, and you also talk about this concept of, you know, of the Democratic Party and the liberals going full circle. Tell me a little bit about this book and what your intention was, and I'd love to go through some of these individual points.
Well, I would say that there are three sections to the book. One is there's a science section that I try to summarize the science on whether the vaccines and whether these other interventions have been effective or not. And what I try to do is use government own statements now in retrospect and government studies that universally show that the interventions were not effective. In fact, they were counterproductive. That the vaccines have negative efficacy. In other words, after the vaccines are complicated because they do work for a while. They do not work for the first 6 weeks after the first vaccine. They begin working 2 weeks after the second vaccine. And during that period, there's a lot of deaths that were not counted. And if you look at the graphs at the beginning of that book, they're really astonishing. I put in graphs, probably 50 or 60 countries around the world. And, we have every country, and they all show the same thing, which is this huge spike in deaths and infections immediately after the first vaccine. Vaccines then tend to work between 2 weeks after the second vaccine and for the next 2 or 3 months, but they wane very, very quickly. And by 7 months, almost all the vaccines have waned into negative efficacy, meaning that if you took the vaccine, you are more likely to get sick, and you're more likely to get seriously sick, and you're more likely to die from COVID. And if you did not take the vaccine, this is after 7 months. What a lot of people see, what the media reports and what a lot of people see is the efficacy during that brief period. But nobody is really in the public realm is really looking at, the long-term impacts of these products. That's one of the issues. And of course, lockdowns have been demonstrated to not be effective, not only against preventing the spread of COVID. There was even the New York Times admits there was no difference between countries and states that had strict lockdowns versus those that did not. There's no difference in outcome in the spread of COVID. But not only that, but the lockdowns, the costs imposed by those lockdowns, we will be paying for generation. According to the World Bank, the cost of those lockdowns to the public was $16 trillion globally. In our country, all of the things that liberals care about, which is kind of an equal distribution of wealth, were thrown, 20, 30, 40 years of progress thrown out the window. There was a $3.9 trillion shift in wealth from the poor and middle class in our country to the super rich. We created 500 new billionaires during the lockdowns. It was a war on the poor and a war on children. Blacks suffered 3.6 times the death rate as whites. There's other countries, by the way, our country had the strictest adherence to all of these protocols, including the use of remdesivir, which is enormously toxic and completely, utterly inefficacious. But, it was Tony Fauci's pet drug. We were the only ones that had it for a year. And in our country, we have 4.2% of the global population. We had about 18% almost 20% of the global deaths from COVID. How's that a success story? We did everything we were supposed to do in this country, more than any other country except for Australia. And we had the highest body count of any country in the world. The death rate in our country was 3,000 people dead from COVID per million population. In Nigeria, which has a 1% vaccination rate, and where the entire population basically is on hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin for malaria and river blindness, they had a death rate of 14 people per million population. So they didn't even have a pandemic.
Yeah.
These were the countries that Tony Fauci said, oh, there's going to be mayhem in the developing world. Well, guess what? There was no vaccinations available to the developing world, and there was no COVID deaths. I mean, I think Africa, the average death rate is 300 per million population, which is 1/10 of the death rate we had in this country. You look at two countries in the Caribbean that are next to each other and have virtually identical populations, Cuba and Haiti. Cuba had an 87% vaccination rate. It had 8,500 deaths. Haiti, which also has 11 million people, had a 1% vaccination rate and had only 800 deaths, so 1/10 the population. And you see these data all over the world, and you compare vaccinated versus unvaccinated countries, but the lockdowns killed approximately 130 million people from starvation or, pushed them into food insecurity globally. So the thing that liberals claim to care about, which is the developing world, et cetera, that was devastated by these lockdowns. Nobody cared. Back in the 90s, Brian, the Clinton administration and people, the liberals, all over the world, we're telling the African countries, okay, we are going to integrate you into the global system and we're going to help lift you up by your own bootstraps. And we're going to bring McDonald's over there. You switch to GMO crops and to monocultures where you can produce corn from us and get rid of your, sustainable traditional crops like sorghum and barley and cassavas and plantains and throw those out and switch to GMO corn and Monsanto pesticides and Roundup and we'll bring cargo over there to Cargill to create the supply chains, and we're going to lift you up. Well, what happened when we had that lockdown? All those countries that had switched over, all that grain was left rotting on the docks and their people left starving to death.
The greedy bankers are about to do it again. In 2008, they crashed our financial system and nearly bankrupted the entire global economy. Then they received trillions of dollars in government bailouts. And after, they demanded fat bonuses paid for by you, the taxpayer.
It turns out the banks haven't just been screwing the American taxpayers, they're also screwing over their investors. Turns out the banking industry is the worst place you could put your money, despite enormous taxpayer bailouts.
Now the bankers are back to take away your financial freedom. They lie and tell you that cryptocurrency isn't safe. They try to make it illegal for you to choose how to invest your hard-earned money. They lie and say cryptocurrency is used by money launderers and criminals. But look at the record. It's the banks themselves that launder hundreds of billions of dollars every year to the biggest criminal operations in the world.
Leaked documents have revealed how some UK banks have helped criminals, money launderers and Russians under sanctions.
American authorities discovered that the Sinaloa cartel moved $881 million through HSBC accounts as bank officials turned a blind eye to the illegality.
The bankers lie and say cryptocurrency is not a real investment. Meanwhile, the smartest CEOs in the world are buying billions and billions of it. The truth is that banks lie about cryptocurrency because it makes them scared. The banks take $9 trillion per year of your hard-earned money, and they are worried that they will finally be exposed. They're scared because crypto means they can no longer control your money, which means they can no longer control you. They are scared because you might actually understand your money and intelligently decide what to do with it. Now is the time for us to come together, fight back, and take control. It's time to educate ourselves, our families, and our communities. Because financial education means financial freedom. We know that cryptocurrencies will help us build the new decentralized financial system of the future. A banking system that is of the people, by the people, and for the people. A banking system where access to finance is a fundamental human right. A banking system that is free and fair and welcomes all humans on this earth. The DeFi revolution is happening. We, the people, can no longer be fooled. We choose to take control of our finances. We choose to take control of our freedom. We choose to take control of our future. Join us, and let's take back our financial freedom forever.